The human body is a remarkably stubborn machine. Deprived of food entirely, it does not simply shut down. It adapts, cannibalizing itself in careful stages, buying time in the hope that food will eventually return. For most of human history, that hope was not guaranteed. Sieges, famines, failed harvests, and long ocean voyages regularly pushed entire populations toward the outer edge of what a body can endure without collapsing. The question of exactly how long a person can survive without food is not a simple one. It depends on body fat, hydration, age, climate, and sheer chance. But history offers no shortage of answers, recorded in siege diaries, famine chronicles, and the physical evidence left behind in ancient bones. This is the story of how long the human body can hold on and what happens in stages when it finally begins to run out of time. Starvation does not happen all at once. It unfolds in distinct biological stages, each one an increasingly desperate negotiation between the body and its own survival. In the first day or two without food, the body burns through readily available blood sugar and stored liver glycogen, a reserve that empties remarkably quickly. Once that initial reserve is gone, the body shifts into a process called ketosis, breaking down stored fat for energy instead of glucose. This stage can sustain a person for days or even weeks, depending heavily on how much fat reserve they had to begin with. Eventually, once fat stores run critically low, the body turns to a far more destructive source of fuel, its own muscle tissue, including, in the most extreme and prolonged cases, the muscle of the heart itself. This is the stage ancient physicians and modern researchers alike consider the beginning of the truly dangerous phase, where survival time becomes sharply and unpredictably limited. Few historical events reveal the outer limits of human starvation quite as clearly as ancient sieges, where entire cities were sometimes cut off from food for months at a stretch. The prolonged Roman siege of Jerusalem, described in surviving historical accounts, depicts a population reduced to almost unimaginable desperation as food supplies inside the city walls completely collapsed. Similar patterns appear across numerous ancient sieges throughout the Mediterranean and Near East, chronicled by historians who documented societies slowly consuming leather, boiled grass, and eventually anything remotely edible within the city's crumbling walls. Some sieges stretched on for the better part of a year, and the survival duration of individual citizens depended enormously on their starting body weight, their access to any remaining hidden food stores, and often their social status within the besieged city itself. These historical accounts consistently describe a similar grim trajectory. Weeks of gradually worsening deprivation, eventually giving way to widespread death, as the body's fat and muscle reserves were completely exhausted. Beyond the walls of besieged cities, entire ancient civilizations periodically faced catastrophic famine when harvests failed, rivers flooded unpredictably, or prolonged drought struck an already fragile agricultural system. Ancient Egyptian records describe severe multi-year famines tied directly to the Nile's failure to flood on schedule, a catastrophic disruption for a civilization almost entirely dependent on that single predictable annual cycle. Chinese historical chronicles document numerous devastating famine periods across multiple dynasties, some so severe that later historians recorded population figures dropping by staggering and almost incomprehensible percentages within a single generation. These weren't isolated, unusual tragedies. They were a recurring and devastating feature of ancient agricultural life, striking with genuinely brutal regularity whenever the delicate balance between population size and available food supply finally broke down completely. Survival during these prolonged famine periods often came down to a family's stored grain reserves, their specific social standing within the community, and sometimes simple, unpredictable geographic luck in where exactly they happened to live when catastrophe eventually struck. Not all ancient experience with extended food deprivation was purely accidental or born from genuine desperation. Many cultures deliberately incorporated structured fasting into their core spiritual and religious practices. Various indigenous cultures across North America practiced extended vision quests, deliberately combining isolation with multi-day fasting as a genuine path towards spiritual insight and transformation. Ancient religious traditions across the world, from early Christian desert ascetics to various forms of Hindu and Buddhist spiritual practice, incorporated extended periods of severe caloric restriction as a deliberate, disciplined spiritual practice. Importantly, these structured fasting practices were generally undertaken by healthy individuals under relatively controlled circumstances, differing enormously from the uncontrolled desperation of a genuine famine or siege situation. Even so, historical accounts describe participants regularly experiencing intense physical symptoms, and these voluntary spiritual fasting traditions likely provided ancient societies with valuable, hard-won practical knowledge about the genuine limits of human endurance without food. The human body did not evolve in a world of guaranteed, reliable daily meals, and as a direct result, it developed several genuinely remarkable biological mechanisms specifically designed to extend survival during unpredictable periods of severe food scarcity. Metabolic rate itself gradually slows during extended starvation, a built-in evolutionary adaptation that reduces the total number of calories the body burns simply to stay alive and functioning. The body also prioritizes exactly which tissues get broken down first for emergency fuel, generally preserving critical brain function for as long as biologically possible, while sacrificing other less immediately essential tissues first. Body fat percentage at the very onset of starvation dramatically affects overall survival time, which helps explain why individuals with significantly more stored body fat have historically tended to survive meaningfully longer than particularly lean individuals facing the exact same period of total food deprivation. Hydration status matters just as significantly as available fat reserves, since a person with consistent access to clean water can typically survive dramatically longer without any food at all than someone simultaneously deprived of both food and water together. Historical and more modern medical records both offer genuinely striking documented examples of extended human survival without food under a wide range of different, often extreme circumstances. Political hunger strikes throughout history have produced well-documented cases of individuals surviving many weeks without any food whatsoever, closely monitored the entire time by attending physicians tracking their rapidly deteriorating physical condition. Shipwreck survivors and travelers genuinely lost at sea have occasionally survived for weeks under the most extreme circumstances, though such cases typically involve at least some minimal access to drinking water alongside their complete lack of food. Medical records from various documented famine and siege situations throughout history suggest that healthy adults, under genuinely ideal conditions involving adequate hydration and minimal strenuous physical exertion, can potentially survive for a number of weeks without any food whatsoever, though individual outcomes vary dramatically based on body composition, age, and general overall health. These recorded cases consistently illustrate the same underlying pattern. Survival time without food is measured far more in individual weeks than in mere days, but recovery, even after prolonged survival, remains a long, genuinely difficult, and medically complex process. Extended food deprivation affects far more than just the physical body. It profoundly and often permanently reshapes human behavior, judgment, and psychological state as well. Historical accounts from famines and prolonged sieges consistently describe a very particular, recognizable progression. Initial and intense preoccupation with food and eating, followed eventually by genuine apathy. Then finally a kind of profound psychological withdrawal as the body's available energy reserves became increasingly scarce and precious. Cognitive function itself measurably declines during extended, severe starvation. Historical observers repeatedly noted confusion, irritability, and impaired decision-making among individuals suffering from prolonged food deprivation. Some historical accounts describe genuine hallucinations occurring during the most extreme, prolonged stages of starvation. The desperate human brain, apparently struggling valiantly to function without its normal, essential fuel supply. These profound psychological effects help meaningfully explain many otherwise difficult to understand historical decisions made under famine conditions, including in humanity's darkest recorded moments, decisions that modern readers understandably still find almost impossible to fully comprehend today. Eventually, if food deprivation continues without end, the human body's remarkable and resourceful survival strategies simply run out of viable options and stop working entirely. Vital organs, having been slowly and steadily deprived of adequate fuel for a prolonged period, gradually begin to fail, typically starting with the body's overall immune system and eventually leading to complete cardiac failure in the most severe cases. Historical medical observations from famine conditions and prolonged sieges throughout history consistently describe a similar tragic pattern. Individuals appearing to genuinely stabilize for a period of time, only to decline with shocking suddenness in the disease's truly final stages. This is precisely why historical relief efforts, even when food finally did arrive for severely starved populations, so often proved tragically insufficient. Bodies that had been extensively broken down over such an extended period frequently could not safely process sudden reintroduced nutrition, a genuinely dangerous medical phenomenon that modern doctors now specifically recognize and carefully guard against. The absolute limits of human survival without food, in the end, eventually, if food deprivation continues without end, the human body's remarkable and resourceful survival strategies simply run out of viable options and stop working entirely. Vital organs, having been slowly and steadily deprived of adequate fuel for a prolonged period, gradually begin to fail, typically starting with the body's overall immune system and eventually leading to complete cardiac failure in the most severe cases. Historical medical observations from famine conditions and prolonged sieges throughout history consistently describe a similar tragic pattern. Individuals appearing to genuinely stabilize for a period of time, only to decline with shocking suddenness in the disease's truly final stages. This is precisely why historical relief efforts, even when food finally did arrive for severely starved populations, so often proved tragically insufficient. Bodies that have been extensively broken down over such an extended period frequently could not safely process sudden reintroduced nutrition, a genuinely dangerous medical phenomenon that modern doctors now specifically recognize and carefully guard against. The absolute limits of human survival without food, in the end, were rarely a clean, predictable number. They were a slow, cascading collapse, arriving at meaningfully different times for every single individual involved. The human body's capacity to endure extended periods without food reveals something genuinely profound about the sheer resilience of human biology itself. Ancient sieges, catastrophic famines, and deliberate spiritual fasting all demonstrate the exact same fundamental truth from different, distinct angles. Survival without food is measured in a matter of weeks for most healthy people. Not days, but the physical, psychological, and often permanent toll of reaching that outer limit is severe and genuinely lasting. Every single society throughout history has had to reckon with this same fundamental biological reality in one way or another, whether through careful famine preparation and grain storage, structured religious practice, or simply the harsh, unforgiving lessons learned the hard way during a prolonged, desperate siege. We now understand, with far greater scientific clarity than any ancient physician ever could, exactly why the body breaks down in the specific stages it does, and precisely why recovery afterward remains every bit as genuinely dangerous as the prolonged starvation itself. If you found this deep dive into the outer limits of human survival as fascinating as we did, consider subscribing for more buried and forgotten stories from history.